The blade stopped a hair away from my throat, and the entire throne room went still. My name is Daniel Cole, and 3 seasons ago I was just an engineer sent to fix broken water systems on a planet called Virell. I never asked to be standing in the middle of a royal court with a ceremonial sword pointed at my neck. But here I was, and the only reason I was still breathing was because the woman holding that sword had frozen mid-strike. Her name was Ilyth, heir to the Vireland throne, and until 10 seconds ago she had been trying to prove to 300 nobles that she was strong enough to rule. The trial was called the testing of the blade. It was an old custom, and I had heard whispers about it since I arrived, but nobody had bothered explaining the details to a human contractor. All I knew was that the future queen had to face a challenger in single combat in front of the entire court to prove she had the will to lead. If she showed fear, if she hesitated, if she flinched even once, the nobles could vote to strip her of her claim to the throne. I was not supposed to be part of that test. I was supposed to be fixing a pressure valve in the east wing 3 floors below the throne room. But an hour earlier, a guard had pulled me aside and told me the princess had asked for me by name, and that I needed to come immediately. I thought maybe something was wrong with the cooling system in her chambers. I did not think I would end up standing in the center of a marble floor while a duel unfolded around me. Let me back up. Virell is not like Earth. The air is thinner, the sky has a faint violet tint in the evenings, and their society runs on something they call the measure of strength. Every Vireland, from the lowest servant to the crown princess, is judged by how well they hide weakness. Crying is shameful. Asking for help is shameful. Admitting you are tired or scared or lonely is considered the deepest kind of failure a person can show in public. I did not understand this when I first arrived. I treated everyone the way I would treat anyone back home. I said good morning to guards. I helped an old maintenance worker carry a heavy crate without being asked. And one evening, 3 months into my contract, I found Ilyth sitting alone on a balcony that overlooked the training yards, staring at nothing, her shoulders tight the way people get when they are holding something in. I did not know she was the princess at first. She wore no crown, no fine robe, just a simple gray coat, and she looked like someone who wanted to disappear. I asked her if she was okay. She looked at me like I had said something in a language she had never heard before. Nobody asks that here, she told me. Nobody asks if the crown princess is okay. I told her that where I came from, people ask that all the time. It does not mean weakness. It means someone cares whether you are carrying too much. She did not answer. She just looked out at the training yards for a long time, and then she stood up and walked away without another word. I thought that was the end of it. I went back to fixing pipes, filters, and generators, and I figured the crown princess of Virell had better things to do than think about a human contractor who asked one strange question. I was wrong. Over the following months, she found reasons to be near me. She would walk past the maintenance bay when I was working. She would ask me small questions about human customs, about Earth, about how humans dealt with fear. At first I thought she was just curious about an alien species. Later I understood she was studying something else entirely. She was trying to understand a way of living that did not require constant performance. I never treated her differently because she was royalty. I could not honestly, because for most of our early conversations I still did not know she was the heir to the throne. By the time I learned who she truly was, we had already talked about things that had nothing to do with politics. She had told me about her mother, the previous queen, who had died when Ilyth was young, leaving her to be raised entirely by advisors who valued discipline over comfort. I had told her about my own family, about losing my father to illness, about how for a long time I thought showing grief made me weak too, until I learned it did the opposite. She listened to that story more closely than to anything else I ever told her. Small moments built between us. She would show up during my lunch breaks and sit nearby, not always talking, just present. I would notice when she seemed exhausted and quietly bring her something to drink without making it a whole event. Once, when a noble insulted her in a hallway loud enough for others to hear, I stepped between them without thinking, not with force, just with presence, enough that the noble backed off rather than cause a scene in front of a foreign worker. She never forgot that. She told me later that it was the first time anyone had stood beside her without expecting something in return. There were other moments too, smaller ones that meant more than they should have. There was a night when a storm knocked out power across half the palace, and while the guards scrambled and the advisors argued about protocol, I found her alone in a corridor holding a small lantern, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with the darkness. I sat with her on the cold floor until the lights came back, and we talked about nothing important, just stories, just quiet things, and she later told me that it was the calmest she had felt in years. There was also a time when she tried to teach me a few words of her language, laughing softly at how badly I pronounced them, and for a moment she looked less like a future ruler and more like any young person enjoying a simple afternoon with a friend. I began to understand that behind the formal robes and the careful posture, there was someone who rarely got to just be herself, and somehow, without either of us planning it, I had become one of the few places where she could. None of that explains why I ended up standing in the center of the testing of the blade with a sword an inch from my neck, so let me get back to that day. The challenger was a noble named Vashek, a broad-shouldered man from one of the oldest bloodlines on Virell, known across the court for his brutal efficiency in every trial he had ever fought. He had spent weeks spreading doubt about Ilyth's fitness to rule, calling her soft, calling her too curious about outsiders, too gentle to hold the throne during difficult times. The court had listened. Doubt had grown. And so the trial was called earlier than expected, forcing Ilyth to prove herself months before she was ready. I was told later that these trials were rarely about actual combat skill. They were about composure. The challenger's job was to push, provoke, and pressure the future ruler until she cracked in front of witnesses. If she cracked, the throne could pass to someone else, even someone outside the bloodline, if the court agreed the current heir showed unworthy weakness. Vashek knew this, and he knew exactly where to strike. Halfway through the duel, after an exchange of blows that left both of them breathing hard, he stopped, lowered his blade slightly, and said something loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. He said that a true queen needed no one, that a queen who depended on comfort from outsiders, who sought softness instead of strength, was already broken before she ever wore the crown. He said her closeness with a human worker was proof that she could not stand on her own, that she needed someone weak to lean on because she herself was weak. I was standing near the edge of the hall at that point, having been summoned only to be present as a witness to some part of the ceremony I still did not fully understand. When Vashek said those words about me, and about her, the whole court turned to look in my direction. Ilyth froze. I watched something happen to her that I had never seen before. Her whole life, she had been trained to answer every challenge with force, to never let a personal accusation land, to project strength no matter what. But this accusation was different. It was not about her combat skill or her intelligence. It was about the one part of her life that felt real to her, the one relationship that did not require constant performance. Vashek saw the hesitation and pressed harder. He said that if she truly wanted to prove her strength, she should finish this duel without distraction, without looking toward that human standing at the edge of the hall like a child looking for comfort. And that was when she moved. She did not attack him. She turned, walked straight across the marble floor, past confused guards, past stunned nobles, and she stopped directly in front of me. She raised her blade, not toward me, but simply lowered it entirely, letting the tip rest against the floor. The entire court gasped. She looked at me, and in front of 300 nobles who had spent her whole life demanding she show nothing but strength, She said words that would become the most talked about moment in violin history for years afterward. She said, "This is my safe place." On Virell, that phrase carries a meaning far heavier than it does on Earth. To call someone or something your safe place is to admit, publicly and permanently, that you cannot carry everything alone. It is considered the single most vulnerable statement a violin can make, especially someone in a position of power. For a crown princess to say it about a human worker in the middle of a trial meant to prove her fitness to rule was almost unthinkable. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Vashek, standing several feet away with his sword still raised, seemed unsure what to do next, because nothing in violin tradition had prepared any of them for this. I did not know what to say. I was not raised in this culture. I did not fully understand the weight of what she had just done. But I understood enough to know that she needed someone steady in that moment, so I did the only thing that felt right. I did not bow. I did not step back. I simply stood there calm and said quietly enough for only her to hear, "You are not weak for saying that. Where I come from, the strongest people are the ones who can admit they need someone." She took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and turned back to face the court. Vashek recovered first, his voice sharp with disbelief. He declared that she had just proven his point herself, that a true queen would never need anyone, let alone an outsider from a world that barely understood their customs. He called for the court to end the trial immediately and rule in his favor, saying no further combat was needed once weakness had been confessed so openly. For a moment, I feared he might be right. I could see nobles exchanging glances, some nodding slightly, agreeing with him. Centuries of tradition told them that vulnerability meant unfitness to rule. It would have been easy for the court to side with him. But then an old advisor stepped forward, someone I had seen many times in the halls but never spoken to directly. His name was Bren, and he had served under Ilyth's mother for decades. He raised a hand for silence, and though his voice was quiet, it carried across the entire hall. He said that he remembered the previous queen well, and that many in that room did too. He reminded them that she had ruled through the hardest years the kingdom had faced in a generation, through famine, through conflict, through loss. He said that what many had forgotten, or chosen to forget, was that the queen had never ruled alone. She had trusted her closest advisors completely, had leaned on them in private even while showing strength in public, and that this trust had made her stronger, not weaker. He said the difference with Ilyth was simply that she had chosen to be honest about it in front of everyone, rather than hiding it behind closed doors the way her mother had been forced to do. Bren turned to Vashek and asked him directly whether he believed the queen who guided them through their darkest years had been weak. Vashek did not answer. Bren continued. He said that perhaps the true measure of strength was not the ability to stand entirely alone, but the wisdom to know exactly who could be trusted to stand beside you, and the courage to admit it openly instead of hiding it in shame. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock. It felt like something else, something closer to reflection. Ilyth used that moment to speak again, and this time her voice was steadier than I had ever heard it. She said that she had spent her entire life being told that needing anyone was a flaw to be hidden. She said she had watched her mother carry impossible burdens alone in public, only to collapse from exhaustion in private, hiding her pain even from the people who loved her. She said she refused to rule the same way, pretending to be untouchable while quietly breaking apart behind closed doors. She said that admitting she trusted someone did not mean she could not fight. It did not mean she could not lead. It meant she understood something her people had forgotten, that strength built entirely on isolation eventually breaks, while strength supported by real trust can endure far longer. Vashek argued that trusting an outsider, a human with no stake in violin tradition, was different from trusting an advisor born and raised within their own culture. He said it proved she valued outside influence over her own people. This was where I finally spoke, because I felt I owed her that much. I told the court that I had come to Virell to fix machines, not to influence politics. I told them that in the time I had spent here, I had come to respect their traditions and their people, even the parts I did not fully understand. I said that trust is not something that follows bloodlines or borders. It grows between people who show up for each other consistently, honestly, without hidden agendas. I said Ilyth had never asked me for anything except honesty, and I had given her that because it was the only thing I knew how to give. I told them that on Earth, we have a saying that a person is not made weaker by the people who help carry their weight. They are made steadier. I said perhaps this was a lesson that applied beyond just one world. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Vashek lowered his sword fully, not in surrender exactly, but as though the challenge itself had lost its meaning. He said that he still believed strength mattered above all else, but he admitted, quietly, that perhaps he had misunderstood what strength truly meant. The court began to murmur among themselves, and I could see the shift happening in real time. Nobles who had doubted Ilyth now looked at her differently. Some looked ashamed of the doubts they had carried. Others looked thoughtful, as if reconsidering years of assumptions about what made a ruler worthy. Bren called for the trial to be considered complete, stating that Ilyth had shown something rarer than simple combat skill. She had shown the courage to be honest in front of the very people trained to judge her for it, and she had done so without losing her resolve to lead. The court voted. It was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. Ilyth's claim to the throne was upheld, not despite what had happened, but in part because of it. In the days that followed, word of what happened spread quickly across Virell. Some called it scandalous. Others called it the beginning of a new kind of leadership, one that did not require rulers to suffer in silence to prove their worth. Ilyth herself changed after that day, not by becoming softer in the way Vashek had feared, but by becoming more open with the people around her, encouraging her advisors and even her guards to admit when they were struggling, rather than hiding it until it became a crisis. I remember walking through the palace gardens a week later and overhearing two young guards talking quietly near the fountains. One admitted to the other that he had been struggling to sleep since his brother had fallen ill, and instead of hiding it, he simply said it out loud, the way Ilyth had. His friend did not mock him or call him weak. He simply offered to cover his shift so he could rest. It was such a small thing, but it told me the shift happening across the kingdom was real, not just something spoken about in the throne room, but something quietly reshaping ordinary lives. Even Vashek, in his own stubborn way, began to change. He never fully agreed with Ilyth's methods, and he remained blunt and demanding in his own leadership. But I noticed he stopped punishing soldiers under his command for showing exhaustion or fear. He started asking, in his own gruff manner, whether his officers were carrying too much. It was not warmth exactly, but it was progress, and on Virell, progress like that mattered more than anyone outside the kingdom could understand. As for me, my contract on Virell was extended far longer than originally planned. I stayed, not because of any political ambition, but because I had found something rare in that strange, beautiful, difficult place. A friendship built on complete honesty, one that had somehow reshaped the way an entire kingdom understood the word strength. Sometimes I still think about that moment in the throne room, the sword lowered, the silence that followed her words, the way an entire court of proud, powerful people fell completely still, because one woman dared to admit she was not alone. I think about how, back on Earth, we rarely think twice about telling someone they matter to us, about admitting we need support sometimes. It is such a simple thing to us. But on Virell, it took a princess standing in front of her entire court, risking her crown, to say it out loud for the first time. And I think about how, in that single moment, she did not just prove she deserved to rule. She proved that even in a galaxy built on power and pride, the simplest human truths can still change everything. Being someone's safe place, it turns out, is not a small thing at all. Sometimes it is the strongest thing in the universe.